And I'm so honored today to be actually joining right now is Dr. Mahmoud Mohieldin, who is the UN Climate Change High-Level Champion for COP27 and the GCF Second Replenishment Facilitator. Thank you so much for coming. And thank you so much, Mills. So Mills Schenk is the head of Boston Consulting Group, East Africa System, and leads the BCG Global Development topic. Thank you so much, gentlemen, for coming. So please, we're going to talk about climate financing and looking into Africa specifically. And I would want to start with you, Mills, because you have had quite some experience working with experts in Africa, looking into development and strategy, right? There's been a common perception of that projects in Africa are riskier. Is it true? How true is it, or is it just a perception?
Yeah, thanks so much. I hope everyone can hear me. So it's a great question, and the first thing I would do is just validate the question to say that we speak with a lot of investors who invest in climate globally, some of whom look and invest in Africa, some of whom don't, and for the ones who don't, by far the biggest reason is the perception of risk, the perception that it is obviously a complex market. It's 54 different markets, and so it can be quite daunting. Now, I know I'm then supposed to segue to say, well, it's just the perception of risk. There is the reality of risk. The reality is that 80% of private investment in Africa goes to 4 countries. 3 of those 4 countries in the last year have seen currency depreciation in excess of 15%. So even if you were just to look at currency and the impact of currency on returns for investors, it's real. And then you have things headlines that are attention grabbing, like Zimbabwe invalidating all of the carbon projects, which make headlines and scare people, and I think that's real. As with everything, you have to de-average, and when you de-average, you see that there are big pockets of opportunity. Specifically, I think if you talk to people who invest in renewable energy, they see very strong returns. They would tell you that their investments are similar risk profiles as they see elsewhere in the world. And so the question is, how do we get more financing, climate-oriented financing into Africa? And I know that this has been a discussion all day, so I'll name a couple of things. I'm confident there are many others. I think the first is, we need more concessional financing. We need more flexibility in concessional financing. And reflecting on the discussion that we just had earlier, where there was a view of we don't want to tilt markets, which I never quite understand, because the rest of the world benefits tremendously from green investment subsidies, and so concessional capital is just a form of accomplishing the same thing. And so I think more of it is required. I think the other thing we need is more regulatory certainty. The reality is it's 54 markets, it's 54 small markets, and if you're doing solar investments or carbon investments, every time you expand, you've got to relearn a new regulatory framework, and I think that creates big challenges for people. And then the last thing, and I think this is why forums like this are quite important, is I think we observe that the market is highly inefficient. And just as an example, I was speaking with someone in the U.S. recently who wanted to do EV investing in Africa. They didn't know the names of any companies in Nairobi who were doing this, and there are many. And so, we just think the market doesn't clear the same way as it does in other places, which I think is why, convenings like this can be helpful. Project pipelines, which Dr. M and I have worked on over the past 18 months, are important. And so I think all of these things will get better, but I think that's what's needed in the short term.
Fantastic, thank you. And talking about that investment, within Africa, because then the the whole aspect of projects, whether they are bankable project being there, on one hand they'll be said, okay, well, there is no finance, but on the other hand, investors will say there is not enough projects. Talk to us about what is going on, what needs to be done, what exactly is the challenge here?
Right. Thank you so much. And let me build on the great response here and from what the GCF presented as well. And your question reminds me of a conversation that I had with Mark Carney exactly like 18 months ago, to your reference point, where after he published the interesting piece on the country platforms. And one of the areas of challenges is basically the bankable pipeline of projects. He put some other things on the list, like deep markets, rule of law, transparency, good disclosure. But I told him, let's work on more tangible area of work. And then if we have the project pipeline, we can always secure it, safeguard it, seal it to a great extent in order to minimize the risks that could be there in some business environment. And we're careful in making a very clear differentiation between market perception of risk and actual risk. And that could only be fixed by better information and better communication and more involvement, including through the pipeline. So we went even more aggressive than bankable projects, went into investable projects, which means more equity participation and more reliance on market participants from the domestic market, from regional bodies, including some big names at the global level. And here it's basically, it's customary for Africans to say if you want to go far, you need to have a good partnership. If you want to go too fast, you can go on your own. I think given that we're a race against time, we need to do both. So the partnership was designed carefully. But here, how can you get all of these different entities? And actually, that was Sagrika and colleagues in the room may recall that when we tried to design this kind of collaborative model, it was basically for people, for the first time ever, they could really meet as friends, but as marketplace creators, that could be the first time. We had governments in the room, project owners on the supply side. We had the private sector. We had the big consultancy firm, have regional and global finance institutions, and we have the regional economic commissions, including that of Africa in the case of UN ECA, but we had the other 4 regions as well. In order to get all of these kind of different entities to work together, you need to have a great deal of patience, because there could be a great deal of tension, and who's going to own what, and who's going to be dominating the scene, and what is a reputational risk for some, and what could be considered as a waste of time for others. So against the odds and the good spirit of building for COP27, and now we are at it for the 2nd year, we managed to build this pipeline of investable / bankable projects. And you will have some of the great cases. Some of them have been in existence and being scaled up, and some of them just fresh as idea and getting that to the market firsthand. So the idea here is basically about the design, and you need to have some sort of coordinators between these different functions that are hard to optimize. And then you need to be patient as well with possibilities of failures at the very beginning, because you may build a pipeline, but not every project is going to be ending up with a good match in the market. And then you may get lucky by having some good interest in a particular country, in a particular sector. And I'm happy again to have the GCF, because we didn't just go to the usual partners, but we went again to those new entities that have been in establishment, but they want really to do more with the private sector, and to do more in higher risk kind of environment, and to do more in cases with vulnerable markets and vulnerable environment could be a constraint. So they can really go and innovate in tools and de-risking.
Yeah, and as we talk about this conference is actually more, it's focused on actually private sector and actually leveraging private sector to do more.
Yes.
But then when you talk about the private sector, they need a business case whereby investments have to make returns.
Absolutely.
And in case of Africa, we are talking of situation where much of investors, much of even the heads of state have been talking about debts and the rising debts. What opportunity exists for this, for the private sector to ensure like they can actually invest as, you know, in nature and climate change related projects, investments to impact, but then again, ensure that Africa do not go further into debt?
Well, two macro big questions that are affecting any kind of macro solution at the project level that we're going to discuss now. First, that we cannot ignore the fact that many of our countries, at least 60 of them, many of them are in Africa, are facing variety of debt challenges, from a debt crisis to a debt catastrophe in some cases. And you cannot just go to a Minister of Finance for extra funding or subsidy, which is legitimate, by the way. And the example that's just been mentioned, that even some advanced economies, G7, OECD countries, you cannot really get some decent investments in a country as big and lower risk as the US without that huge subsidy under the IRA. You cannot really do more in Europe with its better, relatively speaking, business environment without the Green Shield kind of investments. You go to Korea, a G20 OECD country, the same. Japan is the same. But here, I'm saying that thinking of subsidizing some areas of work, especially with the bigger problem here in Africa, is more an adaptation that would definitely require more government and more international concessional support and subsidy. Second thing, you cannot talk about subsidy while you have budget constraint. If you have debt service now in many countries in Africa exceeding what you are spending currently on education, health, and essential services together. Speaking continuously, this is my daily job, to speak to ministers of finance in Africa and in Arab countries and Mediterranean. And you say, well, my good friend, I have this kind of challenges now to meet these kind of essential kind of obligations. Do you expect me to allocate more funds to make some of the projects more viable by de-risking them or making them more feasible? Of course, these countries need to have some sort of a parallel approach. While we are doing what we can through the MDBs to inject more money, one area, and I like to get your attention to a recent piece by the Finance of Development magazine published by the IMF talking about climate debt. It's not debt accumulated by the like of African countries, but basically the climate debt, which is basically the debt accumulated by the great emitters and great polluters since the first industrial revolution until now. And even if we're forgetting about the past, which we shouldn't, actually during the last 20 years and more, let me quote Mr. Kerry, when we started to talk seriously based on science since the 1980s, many had been proceeding, and now we are heading to COP28, when many of these climate indebted countries are increasing their debt. I would say let's swap the debts, the financial debt to climate debt. And there are many things. Of course, we spoke about climate debt reduction mechanism, debt swaps, nature swaps. But I think we need to have more understanding that, as President Ruto today said, Africa could be really your big solution to your problems through the forests, through the fact that we, until now, and don't take that for granted, until now, we are not really emitting high. But if we are pushed without alternatives, the emissions are going to be high. So we need really to do better in investing in clean solutions, green solutions from the beginning, rather than doing like others, growing dirty and then spending huge sums to clean up.
Yeah, thank you very much about that. And as we talk about investing mills, I want to come to you now. As you know, Dr. Mohieldin is talking about projects and investing, actually looking for there to be sustainability there in its project. And we talked about bankability of the projects that we have, right? But then again, how do you build a project from like to a successful project that can be funded? You know, how do you build that?
Yeah, we, and Dr. Mahmoud and BCG and the Climate Champions, as we mentioned over the last 18 months, have built a project pipeline. It's 400 global projects, 200 of which are in Africa. The cumulative Africa investment, if all of the deals happened, is in excess of 50 billion. It's a lot of work to create a pipeline like that, and we've learned a lot in our experience doing it. And Dr. M, you should add here as well. But what we've found is that 60%, well, first of all, when people say project or deal, they are talking about wildly different things, right? So, things that are, ideas, things that are, fully bankable with investment cases. And what we found was that if you segmented the deals by sort of stage of maturity that about 60% of them got stuck in the feasibility or pre-feasibility stage. So then the question is, well, why does that happen? And what can we do about it? And I think in terms of why it happens, particularly in Africa, I think the reality is that many of the investments or many of the projects are smaller. And so the capacity of the teams to be able to overcome technical hurdles, to be able to acquire, the capabilities that are needed to move a project towards bankability is harder. I think the other thing is often, particularly again, outside of the four main economies that are attracting a lot of the investment, the people that have the projects are truly pioneers. And, we're going to hear from some of them in a few minutes. But if you're doing the first carbon project in Zambia, you're having to define the regulatory environment. You're having to educate the market on, what carbon financing means. That's a much bigger lift than if you're doing this, in Manhattan or London. So then the question is, well, how do we overcome that? And I think you've heard two things today. I think one is, at least our belief is that there needs to be more, grant type funding from philanthropies to help project developers at these critical moments to kind of get past that feasibility stage. And then the other thing that we are seeing increasingly is, DFIs and other investment mechanisms are sort of reaching upstream. So I think GCF talked about that. We know, IFC is doing a lot more upstream. And again, it's all with the same objective of trying to get project owners over this hurdle towards bankability. And it's a non-trivial task.
What are the lessons that you'd say you can share that you've actually learned within the years that you've actually been? Okay,
yeah. So I think the first thing is, it's a lot of work. I mean, I'm sure there's a lot of climate investors here that are working really hard to source investments. We had the benefit of leveraging the UN Climate Champions, the UN Regional Commissions, the COP Presidency, the BCG Network. And so, we had a really interesting set of deals. So I think, that's a learning. The second thing is this idea of, deals come in all shapes and sizes. And so, when I mentioned 200 deals, these are cut across different sectors, different geographies. There's some A&R deals, there's some mitigation deals. And then the last point, I think, is just around segmentation and the importance of figuring out which segments of deals are relevant for which types of capital. And so, Dr. M mentioned only the most mature deals are going to be ready for equity investments, but there's still the need to direct, pre-feasibility deals towards philanthropic capital. And so you really have to disaggregate and sort of de-average and segment the deal pipelines in order to help deals advance towards bankability.
Fantastic. Just before I open it up to the audience, African development, when you think about the strategies that African countries have, my question is, what strategies can be employed in terms of to ensure that climate financing can be able, initiatives are aligned to African development? And when we talk about African development, these individual countries basically, or the Agenda 2063 in terms of where Africa needs to go.
Right. Colleagues in the champions would remember this. I think when I started my work with them, I entered in a very dangerous zone. Talking about development finance to climate finance experts is a kind of blasphemy for some of them. Say, well, it's our zone, we are protecting it, and they are taking it from a very narrow perspective, many of them negotiating the famous 100 billion. And then we know, of course, the 100 billion is important, but it's not really that important, the bigger magnitude of things, this one. And it's great that we need really to go and monitor the commitments and the pledges, and it's a token of trust as well. But at the same time, we are realizing that every project, including those that are going to be presented now, they have developmental impact. If it is mitigation, it's translated in sustainable development as SDG 7, which is basically securing energy for all. If it is about adaptation, if you follow the Sharm el-Sheikh adaptation agenda, it's in water management, agricultural system, food security, protecting shores and coastal areas, developing infrastructure properly. So it's all, you get that scattered in SDG 6 on water and the rest of the SDGs. So I don't really see this kind of dichotomy. It's a false dichotomy between climate finance and development finance. And here you can really have, first, better alignment by different sources of funding, including by the multilateral development banks. Second, for those who are still around in existence and consider still that climate finance And climate at large is not really something immediate that they need to be concerned about. We're telling them we are providing 3 solutions to the 3 immediate issues of concern, that is overwhelming development efforts in Africa in particular. They don't have adequate access to energy, so I'm providing solutions through mitigation and mitigation finance. You have problems when it comes to water management and food, or the Sharm el-Sheikh adaptation agenda, and here the Sharm el-Sheikh adaptation finance comes close. And then we come with solutions related to debt, because quoting distinguished economist Ken Rogoff, that we cannot solve climate crisis by creating more and more scattered debt crises. And here it's basically the project participation, the private equity participation, and if it is about debt, we put this kind of challenging, innovative terms and conditions when it comes to replenishment of funds and enhancing the capital of the multilateral development banks, including the World Bank and the African Development Bank. We say it's not enough just to do capital increase. We need to have few things. First, terms and conditions. We need more concessional finance. This means longer grace period, no less than 10 years. We need to put a cap on interest rate. We said 1% to achieve the 1.5 degrees. And then you need to enhance the payback period or the maturity for no less than 20 years. This seems like far-fetched, but actually IDA, the International Development Association of the World Bank, in existence does that, but for a smaller group of countries, which are the low-income countries. Africa today is growing to be a continent of low middle income countries and middle income countries, in addition to low income. So we need really to extend these kind of terms and conditions to the MDBs. Second, we need to stop any kind of financing that could come from the MDBs that could really hamper or complicate the lives of these projects that are here. If they are going to be helping governments or directly crowding out private sector and private sector finance. And here they need to be very careful about the design of instruments going forward. Third, where is the travel, where is the road less traveled? It's very much on the adaptation area. And even, and you remember the statistics, still, even in our projects, the majority of projects are 65 to 70% mitigation, and we have 15% to 20% on adaptation, and the rest are basically dual purpose. The Green Climate Fund is to be commended for doing more on the adaptation front, but again, everybody else needs to do more than that, and I would say that we need to emphasize more concession long-term finance by MDBs and encourage more private sector participation in the adaptation opportunities, which could be only feasible by more concessional finance and more support from government. And I have to say, more subsidy, like the big guys are doing with their budgets. We shouldn't really be shying from providing subsidy, but we need to afford doing that.
Thank you very much. Gentlemen, I am going to open the floor. It's actually top of the hour. We have basically 5 minutes, I think. So for questions, 2 or 3 questions, please. No question. All right. So as just to give you a round of few minutes to just your final.
Never will. Silence means acceptance. So it seemed that everything else that I said had passed your test. I'm not assuming that you are tired or anything like that. Okay.
Thank you.
I mean, just final thoughts. I mean, I would go back to, I think, some of what we talked about around the marketplace and the importance of marketplaces like the ones that we have created, because again, I think we just find, you know, I'm constantly amazed talking to investors who are looking at Africa, talking to investors that are looking for capital, and they just don't seem to find each other in ways that you would expect them to. And so, you know, this space of project pipelines is getting crowded, but it's also getting more sophisticated. You know, we're seeing sectoral level pipelines being created. We're seeing, you know, geographic level platforms being created. And I really, you know, hopefully in 5 or 10 years, you know, the market won't need this and things will become a lot more efficient. But I think in the short term, these are valuable mechanisms.
Okay. Thank you so much for your time. I sincerely appreciate.
Thank you.
All right. So, yeah. So I'm going to invite Sagarika. So who will So Sagarika, please take the stand. Sagarika, I had mentioned there'll be three sessions, so there'll be pitches. Sagarika, please.
Thank you so much, Sophie. And if I could just ask Daniel and Ewan to join me. Thank you for years. Wait, please, 1, 2, 3. Perfect. Okay. Brilliant. Great. So welcome to this segment. This is the most exciting part of the day. It really, really is. So this is a session that's going to focus on our project owners, and we're going to go from the theoretical to the practical. You're going to hear from real deals and our project stories that have come from over Africa. My name's Sagarika, and I lead the finance work at the High Level Champions for Dr. Mohieldin. And with me, I'm really delighted to have Ewan Lowe on my far left. Ewan is the Climate Sector Lead, Energy, Industry and Transport at the GCF. Welcome, Ewan. And on this side, I have Daniel Farchi, who is the Climate Investment Manager, Nature and Ecosystems at GCF. Welcome, Daniel. Great. So if we are going to start this session, the way we're going to do it is we're going to hear from our project owners, and we're going to hear from 4 project owners shortly. Noble Ekaja from Phoenix Edison in Nigeria, Peter Rosso and Nico Knight from Shonau Solar, Akimbode Bamboge from Oando Clean Energy, and Emmanuel Egie Mensah from Arch Holdings from Ghana. And the way we're going to do this is we're going to have 10 minutes per project owner, followed immediately by 5 minutes of feedback kindly provided by Ewan and Daniel on that specific project. And then we'll go to the next project. Now, the aim of this, obviously, is not just to tell the project stories, but is to attract funding. And so if you do find these projects of interest, if they pique your interest, if you want to find out more, the great news is our project owners are with us, not just tonight during the business networking dinner, but also tomorrow morning. And obviously, you can connect with them afterwards. Okay, great. So with that, I'm going to invite up, please, Noble from Phoenix. Noble, you're welcome to either use the podium or if you'd like to present from here, whichever you prefer. Yeah, that's fine. Yeah, please. Yeah, that's great. Yeah, that's it.
All right, hi. Thank you. My name is Noble Akaja. I'm here speaking from Phoenix Edison about a waste-to-energy project that we're developing in Nigeria. I'm really grateful and excited for this opportunity. So the first question really is, why waste-to-energy? Why Phoenix Edison? Africa has been experiencing what I would describe as a productivity revolution with the emergence of its urban consumer. The picture for people from outside of Africa doesn't really come across as an urban continent. People sort of think of Africa as having open, free-range, grasslands and lots of rural communities and the like. But the truth of the matter is today, Africa's 1.4 billion population is almost as urbanized as China. It's much more urbanized than India. As a matter of fact, there are about 52 cities with a population of about 1 million or so across Africa. That is more than the entire continent of Europe has today. Nigeria, where I'm from, has 24 of those cities. So that's a huge amount of urban-centered population. We all know the story of Africa's rising population growth rate. It's the fastest growing continent in the world. As the continent grows, these cities will become even more greatly populated. And as they are growing, one of the big challenges for the cities is the waste that is generated as the cities expand. Today, the practice in most African cities is really around waste collection and disposal into landfills. There is some limited composting that's done, and in some specialized areas, some composting, but it really ends up in the landfill for the most part, and sometimes just being openly burnt. So that's a problem from a point of an environmental impact, just in terms of hygiene and the likes. Most of these landfills are not sanitarily prepared, so there's leaching of toxins into the soil and the like. So, that needs to be fixed. In addition, in the case of Nigeria, we have a huge energy poverty problem. So my country basically generates about 5,000 megawatts of electricity and distributes that from the grid to a population of about 200 million people. For context, South Africa, which has 1/3 of Nigeria's population, about 60 million people, generates 50,000 megawatts of electricity. That's almost 10 times the amount of electricity that Nigeria currently generates. And even at that level of production, for those who are familiar with South Africa, you're aware there's a huge amount of blackouts and so on happening today. So you can imagine a situation in a country like Nigeria where we will have more extensive blackouts that extend for hours, days, or even weeks at a time. So what does our project do? Waste to energy is not new to the world. In fact, this is a fairly well-established solution in almost every other continent of the world. So if you go to Europe, Asia, North America, these plants have existed for 30 plus years. So it's not entirely revolutionary in that sense. But what it does, it solves the problem of waste and electricity. And we believe it can be an important part of the solution in addressing the mix for power and waste in a growing urban Africa. So what does the project entail specifically? It's a 24 megawatt project. We have looked at different types of technologies, and there are many types of waste to energy technologies out there. But we eventually settled on incineration for a couple of reasons. First of all, it's the most long established, oldest type of waste to energy technology that there is. But more importantly, unlike other types of technologies, you don't require a lot of pre-sorting of the waste from source to get a specific type of waste. It takes a melange of all the waste, as we currently do across Africa. Additionally, we have the fortune of having a technology partner that has the most advanced version of this technology, which means it's much more efficient than other incineration technologies. So we're able to build a project on selling just electricity. Most waste-to-energy projects, you have to sell electricity and or heat and or get a tipping fee for the waste management from the government, which is a challenge in Africa, but we're able to avoid all that for this reason. So we use municipal solid waste. We've been able to achieve a couple of milestones. We've done a pre-feasibility study for the project. We've been able to get a long-term waste concession signed with the state government. In fact, they're an equity investor in the project, a minority equity investor in the project. We have secured land for the project, and we've actually gotten term sheets for 11 megawatts of the offtake demand for the project already secured. Why is this important? Once we can provide reliable, affordable power to people, it improves their ability to make money, their livelihoods, and so on. Just to sort of focus in on landfilling and why that's a big issue. When you have landfills, open landfills, they decompose. And in the process of decomposing, they generate methane as a gas. First of all, methane has 25 times the adverse impact of carbon dioxide. So it's severely worse for the environment than carbon dioxide. This project uses up 95% of the waste, and you only end up with 5% of inert material going to the landfill. So you don't have this problem. It goes away by using this technology. Additionally, there was a study done in the city of Onitsha by the World Health Organization in 2016. And in that study, they found Onitsha was the most polluted city in the world by air pollution, having tremendously bad air quality. It was publicized quite widely at the time. And a big part of the contributor for that is the waste, the open burning of waste in Onitsha, and also the fact that this city, people rely on diesel and petrol generators as an alternative to grid power. So this project helps to displace those two things, and in the process can save 270,000 tons of carbon. So it's a huge impact in that sense. Just for people who don't know Onitsha, it has 3.5 million people. So by Nigerian standards, it's a small, middling-sized city, but it's a tier 2 city, but it's a lot of people's lives will be impacted by this project. Yeah, I can see that, yeah. So just to sort of align, it aligns with all the GCF goals. We create good paying, high quality jobs. We have a commitment to employ 30% women and 70% youth employment. We are providing affordable power to a community that typically spending 2 or 3 times that amount on diesel generation today. This will be a unique project in the sense that it brings a paradigm shift in terms of how waste is managed in Nigeria and potentially across Africa. There's only one other project of this kind existing in Africa today. And Nigeria has already committed at the COP26 to carbon neutrality by 2060. So this aligns with that. And as I mentioned today, the state government, which is sub-national, has already aligned with this project as a minority investor, signed a concession with us, and has already agreed to providing equity through land in the project. So where are we in the fundraising process? So the project total cost is $115 million. I'm pleased to say that we've been able to attract some strong participatory interest from various fundraisers, but from a debt and equity perspective. We've already attracted $10 million of equity and about $12 million of debt, so about $22 or $23 million so far. So there's a gap of about $24.5 million in equity that we're still trying to close and seeking investors for, and similarly about $67.5 million for debt. So this is really the opportunity to be part of having a part in this transformative sector that will have a profound impact on urban Africa going into the future in a new and dynamic sector. Thank you. I'm grateful for the opportunity and happy to take questions.
It's terrific. Thanks. Noble, would you like to just join us here quickly? Thank you. So I'm going to turn now to Ewan and Daniel. I mean, you see so many projects all the time. So just share with us a bit, maybe Ewan first. What are your reflections on this project?
Thank you, Sagarika. So what we're going to do in providing feedback, I'll maybe look at some of the technical, commercial issues, and then you'll share some of the banking perspectives. Yeah? So thank you to Phoenix Edison for presenting this project. This is a universal problem that we see in many, many markets. And the conventional dialogue, when you go to the commercial banks to say, we have a waste to energy project, we're looking for funding, is that the banks look at it as a traditional IPP project. And they'll ask, what is the fuel supply agreement? How secure is that supply agreement? What is the power offtake agreement? But let's just unwrap these risks a little bit. There's 2 key risks that you have in waste to energy projects. The first is the capex for the project is very high, so very capital intensive and very hard then also with typically quite a wet fuel, a lot of moisture in the fuel to get a high yield of energy. So there's 3 key secrets to making this work. The first is a very practical thing of education to the communities on educating to separate kitchen waste from the dry wastes. If you can educate on that and have separate collection of green waste from dry wastes, you protect the value of those resources. Waste is a resource. The green waste, you can then put through anaerobic digestion, make methane gas. It's a fungible commodity. It's a new revenue stream. The dry wastes, you can take through recycling and you can bring back to market. Paper, plastics, etc., earn typically between $100, $150, $200 per ton minimum when clean and sold back to the market. But it also reduces the size of the capital investment that you need for the waste to energy facility and improve the quality of fuel that you're providing to the waste to energy facility. So you get a higher yield of electricity per ton and per dollar invested in the capital investment. Just bringing this to GCF, really this shows a lot of mitigation, but also it really is helping if you're looking into dealing with the informal sector in the waste collection with a lot of vulnerable people. Roughly for every 100 people in an urban population, there's at least one waste scavenger, waste picker. and it's really the hardest to reach. So from working with GCF, really to try ask our help in helping in managing that institutional, technical, and financial transformations in educating the market to bring these projects through. Daniel.
Thanks.
Thanks. Yeah, no, the comments are really on because I can see the project itself is really well thought through. So this is really comments on the presentation, but I think to emphasize something Ewan touched on, the key questions, I think, from a bankability, the first questions anyway, are going to be, so the offtake, and you had as part of the slides, you've got a long-term offtake and the tariff and so on. And then I think the other key question I've seen come up immediately on similar projects is supply. So to really kind of emphasize the security of supply, how it's locked in, how you avoid unexpected increases in prices, because once you've set the plant in place, obviously then you're kind of captive demand source. So I think that would be a really good thing to bring out in the presentation early on. And then also you mentioned the kind of high quality of technology providers. So again, I feel like a good thing to emphasize early on is the technology guarantees and so on that you're working with as part of that technology supply.
Daniel, thank you. Noble, I know I'm putting you on the spot. Any initial reflections on what you've heard?
Yeah, no, thank you. I think those are fair questions, and they're questions that we've received in the past, and questions that we've tried to structure in the project. So in the case of Nigeria, waste management is a statutory responsibility of states. There are 36 states. So we are talking to a state government as our partner because the supply is critical. So we're aligning the long-term success of the project with their interest as a minority. So not only will we be an important contributor for tax payments, job creation, all these things that state governments want, but because they're an owner, they have a vested interest in the long-term success of the project by ensuring that we continue to get supply as they manage the policy on waste supply and so on. So that's how we try to address that. So there's already an infrastructure for waste collection that exists, but that waste ends up in a landfill. So so we're just telling them, don't take it to the landfill anymore, bring it to our plant. In terms of the other elements around separation, so we initially, when we started this idea, we went with a boilerplate contract agreement for a project in India done by the World Bank, which had 54 pages. It was a different state, had a tipping fee and all these great, wonderful things that projects typically have. And we were stuck with that state government for 2 years. We got an LOI, but we couldn't get an agreement signed. In the end, we figured out the reason why we couldn't get an agreement signed was these governments' budgets were already stretched. So if you're asking them to pay another fee on top of the fees, they have barely enough money to do schools, roads, hospitals. You're asking them to pay another fee for waste. It was a deal breaker. So finding a technology partner to make the economics work on the electricity sales alone was very critical for us. There are upside opportunities like carbon credits, which are not factored in our project economics now, which we can benefit from over time subsequently. So once we knew that that was what we had to do contractually with the states, then the question then began, if we wanted to have them do pre-sorting from source, this is a city of 3.5 million people. That's one city of 3 cities in the States. Who's going to buy the bins to do the separation? Who's going to make that investment to do the pre-sorting? So you have to look at these things from a practical African perspective. So we just said, look, rather than trying to do the ideal, let's do the practical and what will work for the context we have. So this is why we chose incineration. This is why we chose the partner we did. They're doing projects now in several other developing countries, in Palestine, in Pakistan, in the Philippines. And they are exporting this model because the same problem about being able to pay for tipping fees exists in almost every developing country, right? So this technology can be a way to unlock this solution across the world. So we think we can be a partner for them to start this journey in Africa.
Noble, thank you so much, and wish you the best of luck in your fundraising. There's many in the room that would like to help. So you'll find Noble at this table and at the dinner later on. Thank you very much. Great. Brilliant. So, delighted to have up next Shona Sola, and we're going to have Peter and Nico. And Peter and Nico, while you're coming, I'm just going to rearrange.
We need to stand a little further from each other.
Good afternoon. My name is which one? I'm not sure. Mike. Okay, there we go. I think that's good.
Can you guys hear us?
Yeah. Which one is this one? Okay. Good afternoon. Yeah, there we go.
Fantastic. Great.
My name is, good afternoon.
Goeienaand.
My name is Peter Rousseau, the Commercial Director for Imesco.
I'm Nico Knight. I'm Imesco's country manager, specifically in Namibia.
We're very excited to tell you about our Shona Solar Energy project this afternoon and hope to transfer that excitement to the audience.
So what is the problem that we are trying to solve here? We are sitting with a carbon-intensive grid in the Southern Africa development community and aging infrastructure. Now, it's not necessary for me to emphasize the necessity for carbon action or the urgency of the timely intervention. Things are happening too slow. It's as simple as that. So, the Shona Solar Energy Project is Imesco's contribution in assisting in climate action. The project will assist in decarbonizing the Southern African power pool, the largest power pool in SADC, and replace aging generation in an area where there's a major energy deficit.
We specifically developed the project in the south of Namibia because of the excellent grid infrastructure, the solar irradiance, and the leading regulatory framework in the region. Couple that with political stability, and you have an excellent area to develop renewables in. The project is a 125 megawatt solar PV project, which will sell energy on the Southern African power pool, a first for the region, for Namibia, and for the pool. We would like to take the opportunity to thank some of our supporters, which include the ECB, the utility NamPower, Southern African Power Pool, NIPDB, as well as the Development Bank of Namibia, not forgetting the Climate Champions and BCG. So the project...
Peter, just one slide back.
Sorry, I skipped one.
So we are thinking regionally, and we are asking you guys to do the same. Now, the project is being developed and will be implemented within the borders of Namibia, but it will create opportunities throughout SADC, or the Southern African Development Community. Now, utilizing Namibia's vast capital, or natural capital, the project will support regional indices, alleviate energy deficit within the region, reduce energy costs for the Southern African power pool competitive markets, create local and regional jobs, all while ensuring economic growth within a very poor region. So think region.
Yes, the project has achieved many milestones along the way, but as recent as last week, we became a Southern African Power Pool member, something that we're very, very proud of. And Nico, tell us about the other milestones.
So after 2 years of dedicated development, the project have reached significant milestones. We've reached all regulatory compliance within Namibia. As Peter mentioned, SAP membership, which is a first of its kind. We've secured land. We've concluded all commercial and technical feasibility studies. And we are now ready to take action and to implement. And we need you guys to do that. Yeah, Peter, tell us about the climate rationale of the project.
Yeah. So being a renewable project on the SAF grid allows us to decarbonize that grid, a very dirty grid with an emission factor of close to 1. The renewables on that grid is made up out of hydro in the north and solar and wind in the south. But with recent declines in rainfall, we've seen a decline in hydro production and an increase in thermal production in the south to make up for that. Adding solar and wind to the mix will have a positive impact on that generation mix.
So as you guys can see, 50% of the Southern African power pool generation mix comes from coal. And only a mere 5% solar and 3% wind. Now, the reason for this low penetration of wind is because we were doing business as usual, a theme for today. And we are trying to shift the paradigm, which we'll get to just now. It is important also to point out that this coal fleet of 59% is aging, and it's imperative for the economic stability of SADC to replace this aging generation.
So how do we align to the GCF criteria? From sustainable development through to the needs of the recipient, we match that. But what we're really excited about is the fact that we have the potential here to cause a paradigm shift.
Yeah, so participation within the Southern African power pool competitive markets is a groundbreaking business model for independent power producers, as it shifts the paradigm from traditional sovereign-backed power purchase agreements to a merchant market model. And the project will prove that merchant electricity risk can be appropriately mitigated, which will in turn unlock finance for other merchant power producing projects in the region.
So the reason we're here, the financing of the project. We believe that a blended finance solution is the way to go here. And to that end, we have secured 28% of the $107 million required for the project. This has come from a grant for development from Development Bank of Namibia of $100,000, which Imesco has matched. Then further to that, they've committed $20 million on debt with their partners, KfW and AFDB. And then on the equity side, we have from Imesco and our equity partners, we have committed $10 million. Imesco is currently in a funding round, and we will probably extend that.
Yeah, so our investment ask today is for project preparation funding to conclude the financing process and reach financial close. We are asking for concessional funding in the form of a grant or concessional debt to lock other commercial debt and more equity participation. And considering the unique project risks, we believe a guarantee facility could also in some form contribute greatly to the project. So our total ask is for $80 million. Yeah, and thank you for the opportunity today. Yeah, and we will take some questions. Thank you.
Fantastic. Well, thanks so much for a terrific presentation, despite all of our microphone challenges and me moving the furniture around. Please come and join us. Terrific. So I'm really excited about the project, and congratulations on the approvals that you've got in South Africa. I like that wording, paradigm shift. So Ewan, I'm going to turn to you. Please share with us your reflections.
Thank you, gentlemen. Fantastic presentation. Really quite an exciting proposition. A big ask. So I think from an investor perspective, looking at this technically, commercially, one of the first questions I think people would like to hear about is, what is the actual market demand, the characteristics of that? And secondly, what are the kind of commercial risks in terms of things like dispatch, grid transmission and distribution, curtailment risks, and how are you managing these? But probably within that, what are the kind of upgrades that are required in the grid? What is the other support that is required to the project. And that brings me to GCF considerations of, this is quite a market-making project, but what are the transformation issues, the paradigm shift issues that you need help on, whether it's on the institution of the market-making or the financial instruments that you need into here. And in how the energy is going to be used, is there any energy access opportunity or ability to bring energy to hard-to-abate sectors? Over to Daniel.
Thanks. And I'm conscious that we're you had very little time, and I think this is true of all the presentations, so the stuff that you couldn't fit in there. I think what makes this really interesting but also unique is the fact that it's reliant on a regional approach. But I also think that then from a kind of investor's perspective, banking perspective, your thoughts go immediately to, okay, what extra complications does that introduce? And that's something I would say would be worth really leading with almost, because so are there are there currency related complications and additional risks? Are there political? Are there, it's the kind of thing you instantly start thinking about when I'm guessing the business model really relies on the ability to export power. So I just think that would be a really interesting area to touch on and to bring right up front into the presentation.
Peter, any initial reflections, or Nico?
Thank you, gentlemen. So firstly, just to get to the market size, it is we are sitting with an energy deficit within SADC. We are sitting, as I mentioned, with an aging fleet that is coal-based, and we've laid emphasis on the regional approach. That is true. But if you look at just the demand in Namibia, Namibia is importing 60% of the energy annually. And the Shona project, the 125 megawatt solar PV plant, is going to add 20% or take 20% down on the import requirement. So it's still not giving the full supply to just to the Namibian load center, if I can call it that. Peter, do you want to touch on the grid?
Yeah, so correctly, there is many challenges in terms of generation. You need generation. You also need transmission, something that needs to be addressed. And then you need demand. The demand is there, but connecting the generation with the demand through the grid is a challenge. And I think that's the opportunity that the Southern African Power Pool is giving to us. They are supportive of projects like this, and we will then dovetail into the transmission that needs to be upgraded. Namibia is a very good example in terms of linking into Angola, linking into Zambia, linking back into South Africa, whereas we were always an importer of energy. Now suddenly we will become an exporter of energy. And I think that is the opportunity here.
And last comment, if I may, on your question on what other challenges there are. The opportunity is that Namibia has the regulation in place to accommodate export projects. Recently, as recent as last week, the Electricity Control Board of Namibia, alongside the Southern African Power Pool, hosted the first of its kind conference in Windhoek, Namibia, promoting the regulatory framework within the country. So that is great news for the country and also for the region. And then you mentioned currency risk potential. The Southern African Power Pool trades in two currencies, US dollar or rands. And I think it might be interesting for investors, financiers, that we could trade in US dollars.
Terrific. That's really insightful. Where can people find you? You're going to be around, lingering tonight?
We'll be right over there at that table.
Fantastic.
Yeah,
Great.
we'll be around.
Brilliant. Can we have a massive round of applause, please, for Shona? Great. So we're going to hear now from our third project owner, And first, you're going to have a video from Owando Clean Energy. So if I could please ask that the video shows, and then we'll have Akumbure join us. Are there some technical people who are going to press the play button on the video over there? Wonderful. Great.
Today, there are both commercial and environmental arguments for why Nigeria must transition from a transport system powered by diesel and petrol to an electric mass transit system. With the adverse impact of a deregulated diesel and petrol market on the cost of transportation biting so hard, Nigerians are seeking alternative solutions to mobility.
So my name is Abimbola Kenja, Managing Director of Lamata. A year ago, we signed an MOU with Owando with a mindset that we would introduce electric buses, and also they would roll out charging infrastructure for it.
You have to make sure that when we roll out fully, it's sustainable.
On Tuesday, 23rd May 2023, Nigeria's first electric mass transit buses were launched in Lagos State, and over the last few weeks, the 2 deployed buses for the proof of concept phase have operated on such routes as Oshodi to Abalinde, Oshodi to Costain, Oshodi to Abulegba, and Oshodi to Ikorodu.
What we've done here is to ensure that as we take on these new forms of transport, electric buses, we apply them to the most rigorous routes with the largest passenger mass to really test them.
With over 24,500 kilometers covered and an average drive time of 14 hours per day, carrying over 45,000 passengers in 55 days, we have prevented the use of 12,286 liters of diesel and mitigated 33.1 tons of CO2 emissions. Ladies and gentlemen, the future of mobility is electric, and that future is here. Our goal is to support Nigeria in achieving her net zero ambition by 2060 as we roll out electric vehicles and charging infrastructure across the country, state after state. We will deploy renewable energy solutions and natural gas to power our charging stations. This is the new role we believe CNG must play in sustainable transport development, powering charging stations, not buses.
Our energy cost of operation is about 70% of our cost of operation. And with this intervention, it is expected that you can crash that cost to as low as maybe about 30%. And you can only imagine what that does in terms of the sustainability of the business model.
By 2026, we will begin the local assembly of electric vehicles in Nigeria, creating jobs and other opportunities within the sustainable transport ecosystem, an agenda fully in line with the country's energy transition plan as published by the federal government of Nigeria.
It's clear that we're ready to go, but it also points to the fact that the work is about to start.
Owando Clean Energy.
Great, thank you so much. And if I could just ask Akumbode to join us, please. Yep, either one should be working.
Thank you. Okay, thank you everyone. Pleasure to be here. My name is Bode Bangui. I'm the CFO of Owando Clean Energy. For those who don't know, Owando Clean Energy is a subsidiary of Owando PLC, and that's an energy company based out of Nigeria. So, what exactly is the problem that we're solving with this project? We've named this project Lightspeed. Lagos State in Nigeria has 21 million people. At the moment now, the state needs close to 5,500 buses to meet their transport demands. And in that state alone, transportation contributes close to above 40% of GHG emissions every year.
That cost the state close to $1 billion in terms of health challenges and deaths. So what have we done? We've seen that at the moment, the state only has 900 buses to be able to meet their demand. And then to be able to create a climate-friendly project to meet this transport demand, we've decided to do a proof of concept to be able to prove that electric vehicles can actually work in Lagos. So as you can see in the video, what we've done first is to deploy 2 buses, and we've had those buses working for about 65 days now. And what do we plan to get from the proof of concept? The first thing is environmental acceptance. As you imagine, everybody were a little bit reluctant to go on a bus because of range anxiety and all of that, which might also happen for your ICE buses too as well. The next thing we wanted to test was technology to see if those buses can actually work in Nigeria, battery range, terrain, and all of that. And then operation excellence as well. And last but not the least was commercial viability, bearing in mind that it's going to be in mass transit. Now, it's important to note that the existing fleet that the state has for ICE buses, yes, they have about 900, but close to 40% are down. You might ask why. It's the energy costs, right? Diesel in Nigeria now, following all the deregulation, have really gone close to $1. And that is not sustainable for the transportation system. So what we've done is to design the project in 3 phases. First phase is the proof of concept, which we're about to finish in 90 days now. The next phase is the phase 1, which we call a pilot. Here we'll deploy 50 buses as well to all the routes. And then the next phase is the full rollout, where we'll deploy close to 2,000 electric buses in Lagos State, and then moving to all the other states in Nigeria. And we believe this is well positioned because, first thing, it aligns with the country's 2060 net zero ambition. And indeed, Lagos State has an even more closer deadline of 2050 to be able to meet their net zero ambition. And then the energy transition plan of the country ensures that by 2030, we would have local assembly for electric vehicles in Nigeria. So what's the climate rationale for the project? We've spoken about the GHG emissions. You've seen from the video the amount of CO2 tons we've been able to save just by using the EVs across the states. And we tend to roll this out for all the other states in Lagos too as well. And not to also mention the SDGs that we achieve with this, the clean energy that we'll be providing to power the buses. Our plan is to deploy, as we're doing now, to have continuous renewable energy solutions that we can use to power all the charging infrastructure. One question we get asked all the time is, you have a power deficit in the country, how do you intend to then power these buses, right? Well, we've been able to do that with the proof of concept, and we're going to also deploy the same thing as we go along for the next phase, the phase 2 and the phase 3 that I spoke about. So how do we align with the GCF criteria? Sustainable transport development. We're going to employ close to 3,000 people. As you can see in the video, we're also focusing to have a huge representation of female as well. As a matter of fact, we have close to about 25% of our drivers right now who are female. We continue to train them on an ongoing basis. And then in terms of impact, we're currently aligned with the country's 2060 ambition. We've created an efficient and effective project that aligns with our vision, which is to create climate-friendly and at the same time bankable projects. So how have we financed this to date? We've been able to raise about $3 million from Owando Capital to be able to deploy the proof of concept. But as we move to phase 2 and phase 3, where we get to 50 buses and then 500, we need additional capital to be able to bridge that gap. So what's our funding structure? We're looking at 70% debt and then 30% equity. Total project cost is about $259 million. And then for the first phase, the phase 1 where we're going to get 50 buses, project cost is about $31 million. And then the next phase is about $2.7 million in total. From the proof of concept, we're able to see that the project itself can generate enough cash flows to be able to repay the loan. So total loan ask from the investment requirement is about $181 million. So we believe our solution aligns with the government in terms of meeting their net zero demands and also helping to solve the climate problem that transport causes in Nigeria. Indeed, other developed countries, you'd have industrialization and commercial production and manufacturing contributing more, but in Lagos, it's actually more of transport. Our solution helps to solve that problem, and at the same time, creating a bankable solution and project for us. Thank you.
Brilliant. Thank you so much, Akinbode. Please come and join us. Thank you, and thanks also for the video. And also, just so you know, for the other projects, we also have videos. You'll find them on the Champions website. Right, Ewan, I'm going to turn to you. Please share with us your initial reflections.
First of all, thank you to Oando for bringing a transport project to us. Transport's one of the hardest, challenging sectors for us. And yet there's a lot of opportunity in this space, especially when you look at electric vehicle fleets. On a whole life cost basis, they can be much more competitive than traditional internal combustion engines. But what I'd like to maybe bring to the conversation today is a different lens, a different way of telling the story, because I think it's a more compelling, more powerful way of recognizing the value that this kind of solution brings. We normally think of transport projects as connecting A to B, but that's not what transport projects do. They create economic connectivity. They connect people to jobs, to education, to health. They bring goods and services to market. Economic connectivity. When you look at a transport project through the lens of economic connectivity, you realize there are many more opportunities that can be captured. You very nicely have brought up the SDGs, and I think that's really important because it really does address a lot of SDGs, but there are many more SDGs that can also be brought into the story, where you can then start to recognize more value that can also be captured, bringing more revenue streams into this. So in GCF, we often use avoid, shift, and improve when we're looking at transport projects. And what we mean by that is, first of all, how can you make avoided journeys? Can you move where people work closer to where they live? So moving the jobs to the people. Looking at integrated transport solutions and integrating with the urban planning. So telling a little bit more of how you're actually integrating to that urban planning. In terms of shift, how do we get people out of cars? Because the congestion problem that we have is about people in cars. In your video, there were bus lanes. That's fantastic. But telling us more about these bus lanes, how can you put in park and rides, getting cars off the road into car parking? That's often one of the critical challenges. And the first mile and last mile, how do you get people from where they live to the bus stations and from the last bus station to their place of work? What is your interface with the other modes of, whether it's pedestrian or walking distance, cycling, whatever connectivity are you looking at, to be able to get that whole journey? Because that's, again, key to getting that modal shift. Also, is there any way you can use your infrastructure for the logistics space? Because that, again, is a different revenue stream, but it needs the same infrastructure that you're putting in place. And then in terms of, you have your manufacturing facility, that's really interesting. How is that going to work? Because when we start to then looking at the operation and maintenance of these types of solutions, what we often find is that the competency to maintain the fleets, to provide the spares, is often not in country. So how are you going to use that competencies to be able to provide long-term sustainability of the fleet? I'll pass to Daniel for any more comments.
Thanks, and not too much to add from what Ewan said. I think for me there are a couple of things that really raise some interesting questions I would want to explore more in the presentation. One was the mix of renewable and LPG. I think, especially from a kind of climate investor perspective, it would be nice to see that, is there a path to eventually moving to 100% renewables, and what does that look like? What's your vision on that? The other was just obviously by bundling two effectively quite different business areas. So you've got the transport, and then you've identified that the solution to the renewable energy supply is to develop your own sources of renewable energy, but they are quite different different business models in effect. So I think from a financing point of view, it becomes a little bit harder to value, right? It becomes a little bit harder to assess the risks and so on because you've got two different business models together. So I just think it'd be an interesting area to explore more. Have you looked at outsourcing that? What was the reason that was not feasible and so on? So just an interesting area to kind of draw out.
Any thoughts on what you've heard?
Yes, I'll take this one first. So in terms of the power infrastructure, so just to correct, it's not LPG, CNG, right? What we're looking at is to next phase, right, will be a mix of renewable and CNG, just CNG as really backup, right? And then by the time we go to the full rollout to be 100% renewable, right? One of the reasons why we decided to create our own power source was to be able to, first of all, control the costs, right? You can imagine, and then also to maintain absolute control of the power of the charging infrastructure, right? So then back to your question. So first thing is, at the moment now, we have a dedicated lane for all the BRT buses, and that works for both the EVs and the ICE buses. One of the things we're working with the government is to have dedicated lanes called Green Corridor only, right? And what that does is that people can see that you can move faster. I don't know if you've been following the trends in Nigeria. In the last couple of months, we've had the regulation in petrol. So unlike before, people are more encouraged to use the public transport versus driving. You understand? The cost of fuel before used to be way under 50 cents, right? Now with the deregulation, it's going higher now. So people are actually inclined to want to use public transport. So that alone too also see an increase in the use of the electric vehicles. One of the things, because this project has different phases. The first phase is the mass transit. The second phase is for private cars and also for logistics too as well, right? However, the charging infrastructure we're building can also serve those purposes. So as you said, you can also charge for logistics too as well in terms of their own EV transportation.
That's great. I'm so sorry we ran out of time. I wanted to say thank you so much. It was really insightful. And you're also going to be around, right, tonight and tomorrow morning? Brilliant. And I think you were sitting somewhere there, so if people want to come up to you, please do. And I'd also really welcome any of our private finance colleagues that are here today, either from commercial banks, asset managers, or venture capital. If you have feedback, thoughts, anything you want to share, contacts that will help our guys, please do come up to them. We really welcome all of that. Thank you so much.
Thank you for having me.
Great. So I'm just going to invite Emmanuel, please, to come up from Arch Holdings. And Emmanuel, we keep having a microphone glitch, so if you need to take this one.
Good evening. My name is Emmanuel J. Mensah from Arch Holdings. Today, globally, 2.3 billion people cook every day with wood fuels and other dirty fuels. This represents about a third of the global population. It's actually down from 41% in 2010. In my country, Ghana, the percentage is 70%, about 21 million people. This is very bad for the environment. We are releasing 23 million tons of carbon dioxide and 3.4 million tons of black carbon into the atmosphere every year. The black soot and fumes being emitted is killing a lot of people. 3.8 million people are dying every year from this. For context, COVID killed 3 million people at peak per annum. So this is pandemic level death caused by bad cooking fuels. Out of this, about 400,000 are children under the age of 5. In 2016, the World Bank estimated that high household air pollution is causing economic loss of 1.5 trillion. This is trillion in economic loss globally, and about $94 billion in personal income. So in simple language, cooking with wood fuels is extremely bad for the environment. It kills people at pandemic levels and causes losses of economic income, both at the national level and at individual levels. So what can be done? In 2015, the UN in SDG 7 stated a goal of clean cooking for all by the year 2030. We are in 2023, only 7 years to go, and the world is nowhere near that objective. What we need is a new call for action, a new sense of urgency, and solutions that can be scaled rapidly if we are going to have any chance of attaining or at least getting close to that objective. So what do? We have selected LPG as a fuel to achieve that. And why LPG? The UN in SDG 7 mentioned LPG as one of the fuel sources to enable the world transition to clean fuel. The World Bank supports LPG. African Development Bank and International Energy Agency are supportive of LPG. Actually, in 2 days, they are launching a new report on clean cooking at the Climate Summit. That LPG is the way to go if we are to transition the bulk of the people cooking with dirty fuels into clean cooking. And LPG meets the requirements of the EU Green Deal. It's not specifically mentioned in there, but when you evaluate the requirements, LPG meets all of that. So if LPG is that great, why not everybody using LPG at the moment? It has all the support because it ticks all the boxes. It is great for the environment, as you can see over there. It has credential that is close to natural gas. It burns with 5% less carbon emissions. It stops deforestation. In my country, we don't cut down forests. We cut down shrubs because they have towards the north of the country, we have only the savanna areas. It is shrubs. So we are cutting down the trees and causing deforestation at a much faster rate than if we were cutting forests. Migrating to LPG will stop that. It will stop the killing. I call it killing. We are killing people, and it is easily scalable. You can transport LPG, and it's therefore very, very scalable. You can scale LPG rapidly to cover a whole nation within a very short time. So why is LPG not everywhere? Why are we still 7 years into 2030 and clean cooking is so lacking? In our estimates and analysis, there are 5 conditions to be met. One is infrastructure. You need infrastructure to receive, if you're an import country, to import LPG and to store. The second is a distribution model, a business model that can be scaled rapidly and is sustainable. It should sustain itself. It shouldn't rely on grants and subsidies to survive forever. The third one is organizations with the skill, operational capabilities to deploy the model at scale. You need scale for this to work. The fourth is supportive government policies and regulatory framework. You need a government to support. And the fifth is funding, access to funds, which is why I'm here. So I'm hoping you will solve the fifth for me before I go. So when we started this in 2013, we stated as our mission, saving the environment, saving lives, and reducing poverty, one LPG cylinder at a time. So from 2013, we've been investing in infrastructure. We've invested $138 million in discharge infrastructure and in receiving storage infrastructure. So now you can receive LPG into Ghana. The capacity is much more than we need, even under our program. And we have the largest storage owner in Ghana at the moment for LPG. So we've eliminated the infrastructure requirements. So point one of the requirements is eliminated, it's done. The second aspect is the business model. Internationally, it's been recognized that the cylinder recirculation model is a model that scales when it comes to LPG. And that is a model that we've been going for. When we started in 2013, it was our intention to go into the CRM, but the necessary regulatory requirement wasn't there. So we decided to deploy the infrastructure. Now government is in there with the supportive policies and supportive regulatory framework. Actually, from this month, we are introducing CRM into Ghana. So the regulatory framework now is up and running now for us to move on to our business model. We've made refinements to the international model to fit our local cultural environment, etc. And we are ready to move. Then when it comes to organizational capacity, we've built a capacity over the years. We have substantial operational and administrative capacity to scale and to deploy at a large scale. Within our group, we have over 800 staff. We employ management, over 250 years of experience in the petroleum distribution sector. So we have the scale. So we have solved the initial three requirements that are needed to deploy LPG at scale. Government have solved the issue of regulation, and we are here waiting for you to solve the next one for us. Now, alignment to GCF criteria for our project. Our project is sustainable. We take about 7 of the SDGs. We are creating 7,500 jobs with our project. We are contributing to good health, well-being, and climate action. I talked about the environment. We are promoting industry. Within our projects, we have changed new design for cylinders, new design for regulators, new designs for valves. We are introducing new high-efficient stoves into the market. The current stoves that come into the market are 54% efficiency. We are introducing 74% efficiency stoves onto the market, from 54 to 74. So we take all those boxes. The impact on the climate is very substantial. We have the credentials of natural gas. We burn 5 times less natural gas than wood fuel or the alternative. We are saving 4 million carbon dioxide equivalent into the atmosphere per annum by 2030. This is significant. And because of the savanna, once we stop cutting down the trees, we are saving 3 million hectares of land per annum. If we don't solve this problem now, within a short time, there will be no land in Ghana without a desert. Now for funding. We are raising $145 million, 22 million in equity, 122.5 in debt. Already, we've invested 14.2 million of our own money. We've built the first plant that is needed for this distribution. We are out here raising the rest. For the debt, we already have commitment for 18.7 million. So we are here trying to raise the rest to continue. We don't need all the money at a go. You give me 1 million, I will deploy. Because what I need is to buy more cylinders. This is about cylinders. So you give me 1 million, I'll deploy. You give me 10 million, I'll deploy. You give me 50 million, I'll deploy. But the intention is to raise all the money that we can as quickly as possible so we can meet our objective of trying to convert 2.1 million households in Ghana. That is 7.7 million people in Ghana from using wood fuels to LPG and save their life. In the process, save a lot of life. Thank you.
Manuel, thank you. Thanks so much. Please join us. So I think Emmanuel's had the hardest job, because I don't know if you guys noticed, but a party seems to be starting up over there. But you still held the audience, so thank you so much. Ewan, I'm going to turn to you, and if I could ask you to be a little bit succinct with your feedback, that would be great.
Thank you very much. First of all, Emmanuel, thank you very much for bringing this to us. This is clearly a mitigation project and an adaptation project, and has so much benefits in it. It's really quite exciting. Especially, we're really looking at helping the vulnerable here, very strong health benefits, preventing deforestation, as well as the mitigation. The big question that we might get asked is, why are we bringing in LPG as a fossil fuel? Why not go straight to induction cooking stoves, for example? That doesn't work everywhere. And we need to be clear in our demand assessment, articulating which part of the market we're targeting. So I think you're really looking more into the rural populations rather than the urban populations. So being very clear on which part of the market. I think two key questions in my perspective are, LPG is imported to Ghana?
We have some local production.
So you have some domestic,
yeah, and then import.
And is there subsidy?
No, not at the moment.
There's not any more subsidy. So I think really just showing then that, that you are able to manage that supply of LPG, that you're being clear on the market that you're targeting. But this is a really commercially attractive opportunity. Investors out there, I'd be coming running up here. Daniel.
Yeah, I would share. I would share that this is really interesting. And actually, it's an area that's really dear to my heart, because I spent a while working in a clean cook stoves company. So it's really interesting. I think from the presentation, the bit that was maybe missing for me was really understanding which parts of the supply chain you're owning, and kind of exactly how that works. And I know that what I've seen elsewhere in LPG cooking is that you have an issue with the kind of the refilling stage, where consumers, there's a safety issue sometimes if strict standards are not respected on the cylinder life, and also consumers have a hard time verifying whether it's been fully refilled and so on. And so I think knowing your relationship with that part of the supply chain is really important, because that's probably one of the weak areas which, if you can't control it, raises questions. So that would have been one thing that I would like to see more of.
Great. Emmanuel, yeah,
Can I
please.
respond? Yeah. So in terms of the supply chain, we actually control it from the import side to the final consumer. So we are building our own bottling plants. We are investing in cylinders, which we control. Like I said, we've designed new valves, new regulators to make them more safer. And we are reacting with the consumer by introducing the energy efficient cook stove. So we control the chain from the import of LPG to the storage, to the bottling, to the distributing, to the final consumer. So we're able to maintain the safety and the standards throughout the chain. Now, to your first question of why LPG, I get asked this question everywhere I go. And of course, we investigated it, and you realize that every country has its own peculiarities. And in the developing world, LPG is now the solution that scales. So if you consider the problems that using wood fuels is causing, and you look at what solution do we have to migrate people from there, LPG is the only answer that comes up. There's support for efficient cook stoves, but efficient cook stoves still bring down trees. You are only improving the efficiency of the rate at which they burn. There are projects that talks about, let's cut down the trees and put them back, afforestation programs. If you look at those programs and you compare to LPG, the carbon characteristics of LPG is significantly better than that. It takes 100 years for those projects to achieve carbon neutrality with LPG. And the world don't have 100 years. So we are hoping that from now to 100 years' time, a better solution will come. But at this particular moment, LPG is the best for the developing world.
Completely agree with that. It is a journey. I think we've got to keep in mind it's a journey with steps as we go through the technology transfer. Thank you.
Great. Well, thank you so much, Emmanuel. If we could have a massive round of applause, please. Thank you. So we are at time. I hope that these presentations by project owners have piqued your interest. I hope it's given you a sense that there are opportunities, how much that regional and local context matters to the climate rationale. Also, obviously, where is the business, where's it going? I'd like to thank the GCF, and I'd also like to thank GFANZ Africa, and I'd like to pass now to our very good friend, Timothy, Dr. Timothy Affel-Thompson, or many of you may know him just as Tim, to run the next session. And thank you very much, Ewan and Daniel. Thank you.
Okay, Segarika, thank you very much. That was a very great job you done. And if I may have the investor panelist, Tarier Berejesin, I'll introduce all of them. Dr. Shrott. Yeah, you can sit anywhere. Yeah. Okay, so the intent for this section is really have some information that will help us weed out. Hello? Is this one? Okay, yeah. So intent for this section is to have some information that we will use to weed out the rest of the projects in the compendium of pipeline that Dr. Mahmoud told you and Sagarika also referred to. So these 4 projects were just 4 of over 200 plus projects in the compendium. And more often, developers get frustrated because they are not singing the song that will resonate with the investors. And today we have investors over here that are going to help us with information, what really takes their interest when they are evaluating bankability and then also their investment interest. So we have Madame Judith Udiambo, who has the regulatory affairs at the KCB. We have Mr. Osaruyu Orobosa Ogbede, and he's the VP for the Project Development and Investment at Africa Finance Corporation. We have Papa Demba Diallo, who is the Managing Director, Project Development at Africa 50. And then I'll come to you because you are the host, so let me skip you. And we have Madame Tarier Gbedegyesin, who is the CEO of Amharit. And we have Dr. Daniel Schrott, who is the Director for the Renewable Energy and Energy Efficiency Department at the African Development Bank. And then our host, who is Soji, a lot of you, actually, I think almost everybody here knows Soji because he is the Deputy Director of the Private Sector Facility. And a lot of you here from private sector may have interacted with him, and he doesn't need a lot of introduction. So here we are going to focus on some sectors. We will not be able to cover all the sectors. So we're going to start with energy, and we'll be starting with Madame Judith. When you are looking at your interest, evaluating your interest in energy project, what ticks your boxes?
Thank you. My name again is Judith Sidi Odhiambo, and I'm the Head of Corporate and Regulatory Affairs at KCB. So thank you for asking the question about what are those things that you look at when you want to support renewable energy. So one of the things is that in KCB, we appreciate that renewable energy, again, is important because it also has the long-term sustainability and environmental benefits. And so as investors, when we try to choose energy projects which have direct or indirect in renewable energy companies. So one of the things that we look at is things like market volatility, changing government policies, because most of the time we find government will give various regulations on that sector, fluctuations in energy prices, impact returns on investments, risks in technology, as well as reliability and efficiency of renewable technologies after a project is successful. Some of the environmental factors also that we look at include extreme weather events, which poses risks to energy infrastructure. So what I would say is that investing in renewable energy will carry in significant implications for the environment, economy, and society when you look at the ESG. And then also it contributes to the reduction of greenhouse gas emissions and combats also climate change. And also renewable energy investments also stimulates economic growth. It also creates jobs when we look at the dots, and enhance energy security by diversifying the energy mix.
Okay, thank you very much, Madam Judith. Now, we know a lot that SAFER has really done, especially at the early stage, stage. If you could let us know if developers are looking for this risk capital for early stage, what you really look for.
If I can borrow your microphone. Thank you very much, Tim, and well, good evening to all of you, and it's great to see the room still interested after a long day of deliberations. Maybe just one very quick thought about the 4 projects earlier. Really want to congratulate them. I also want to congratulate BCG and the climate champions, and really encourage also, if it hasn't happened yet, to engage the African Development Bank, particularly in the context of the Africa Investment Forum, that provides sort of the opportunity to go into detailed boardroom discussions on various transactions with investors around the table. Let me just say 2 sentences about the Sustainable Energy Fund for Africa. So SEFA has really become the largest in-house blended finance facility, the African Development Bank, over the last couple of years. We have cumulatively around over $500 million now available in terms of resources to be deployed. We're looking at basically providing catalytic finance to unlock private sector investments in renewable energy and in energy efficiency. We are now having a capital base, as I said, with 10 donors. We will have a session tomorrow at KICC where we will see 2 new commitments from existing donors, and you're all welcome to join that session. We have basically 3 thematic areas that we're looking at. One that we coined green baseload, which is really looking at alternatives to fossil fuel-based power generation, but also looking at how can sort of the flexibility of grids be improved, really to have these kind of equivalent sort of capacities that renewable energy can provide to fossil fuel-based power generation. We're looking at green mini-grids, which is really the whole decentralized energy access agenda that we're sort of addressing through this pillar. And the third one, which I think is very important and it's not receiving enough attention, is on energy efficiency. And we're providing basically 2 types of solutions. One is we provide technical assistance. So we provide sort of the early stage project preparation support. That can be in the form of grant if it's really justified, but I think increasingly on the private sector side, we say we can provide a reimbursable grant. And if the project is successful, reaches certain milestones, we get that project preparation funding back, can recycle it, redeploy it to additional projects. And then the other thing is obviously we provide concessional investments now, and we can provide that in different types of instruments. For example, taking junior positions, innovative new funding structures, providing concessional loans where it's justified. So there's a whole kind of flexibility there in terms of the instruments that we can deploy. So what are some of the criteria that we're looking at? I think it's not rocket science. I think the first bucket is really what I would call the project fundamentals. So it's really about financial viability. Is the investment sound? Is it kind of sustainable even after that first investment? Under this kind of project fundamentals, it's also the project team. Who are kind of the people that are promoting this? What is their experience, their track record? It's extremely important. Sometimes we see projects and, for example, we say, actually it would make sense if you bring in that additional expertise to the project. Can you look into bringing in a strategic investor that brings sort of elements to the table that you're currently not having? So that's extremely important. And then obviously we're also looking at aspects of innovation, technological readiness. I think it's very important that the technology has been tested somewhere. So we don't want to kind of take all the kind of initial technology risk. The second kind of bucket is what I would sort of say the enabling environment. I think it's obviously very important to look at what is the policy, legal, regulatory environment in the market the project is operating in. For example, if we invest in a mini-grid project, it's extremely important what are the regulations in place. When the grid arrives, are there compensation procedures, et cetera, et cetera. Similarly, on grid-connected projects, what is sort of the arrangement in terms of the power purchase agreement? How solid is that? What is sort of the kind of the risk-sharing balance in that arrangement? Very important elements around sort of the enabling environment. And then I think the third bucket, which is important for CEFA specifically, because it is a concessional investment tool, it's really around development impact. What is the additionality, the application of the blended finance principles? Sort of, are we crowding in the private sector? Are we providing concessional finance, but sort of with a minimum concessionality? So we don't want to over-subsidize. We want to provide sort of the right quantum that really allows the private sector to move forward. So I think these are broadly sort of the three buckets, I would say, of sort of criteria that we're looking at. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much. Actually, on your question of the project, we have about 4 of the projects that's actually on our radar. And AFDB will be coming to PSF, for that. So if you have showcased them, at least I think it's going to be my brother Soji. So we're going to Tari. You are in a space that is really tough to crack for many, sustainable cities. What do you look for?
Thank you. I'm not sure sustainable cities are that difficult in the grand scheme. We actually think it's a really there's a real intersection between the need as well as the application of private capital, and it's for the following reasons. Africa is rapidly industrializing. It's expected that 50% of Africa's population will be living in cities in coming years. But a really interesting piece of data is that a majority of African cities contribute, the cities contribute a significant amount to African GDP for each country. So for example, Lagos contributes about 25 to 30% of Nigeria's GDP. And in West Africa, certain countries, especially the smaller countries, their cities contribute up to 65% of the nation's GDP. So a lot of the economic activity beyond resource extraction, which is around where there's disposable income, is actually happening in cities. And so if we were to channel capital into the nodes of climate action, clean energy in cities, we have a way to make climate action, achieve climate action, but also do it from a private sector standpoint because there's increasing amounts of activity in cities. So how do we dimension our opportunity set? I mean, our fund, we're an infrastructure private equity fund based in Lagos. We invest in West Africa. We've done a lot in energy and a lot in transport. And we're established, we have experience managing international capital alongside domestic pension fund capital. And we're applying our architecture into a climate and transition fund for the continent. And one of the areas that we have sort of been able to invest in has been across the spectrum. We've invested in development, we've invested in construction risk, and we've invested at the operational stage. In Africa, the investment opportunity is greenfield. In cities, a lot of the opportunities are around clean energy, sustainable transport, so emissions reductive transport, sustainable ways of moving freight, resilient road architectures and public transportation systems. So I think one of the proponents here today was looking at bus, electric vehicle, electric transportation. There's going to be a significant requirement to retrofit bus rapid transport systems across Africa and to retrofit them to be electric and to be more sustainable. We have to stop congestion because a lot of African cities, the infrastructure is not growing at pace to the population that is moving to them. A lot of folks think that African cities is where wealth is centered. But what is happening is the pressure on cities is so significant because it's where there's jobs, is where there's light. And so by virtue of that, there's urban sprawl and a lot of poverty around cities. So there's a lot of work to be done from an infrastructure standpoint. So we're very excited to see the type of opportunities. I mean, one of the other projects that was presented here was around waste. We have major landfill takeover in African cities. And it's a significant danger in terms of the amount of methane, the potential for fires that we see with these landfills. And one of our challenges in Africa has been the fact, or in fact globally, has been that a lot of waste to energy solutions are not climate positive. They're effectively incinerators. And so now that we have a technology that's climate neutral, that you're seeing the folks like Phoenix that are implementing, we see this as a great way to address methane and landfill overswell that we're seeing in African cities. So the African cities opportunity is energy, it's emissions reductive transport, it is effectively the economic ecosystem, but in a space where there's a lot of economic activity and there's a lot of disposable income.
Thank you very much. Sustainable cities actually places energy, waste, and even transport. So it's a very good segue to the transport sector. And Demba, in the transport sector, what do you look for?
Thank you. Hi, everyone. So we are standing between you and your long-awaited rest. So we'll try to make it short. So thank you for having us. So Africa 50, our mandate is really to develop infrastructure in Africa, and we're doing that by doing project development. So we are taking projects at the early stage and working with them until financial close. So this is important because we touched a bit about sustainable cities. And you cannot talk about sustainable cities without talking about transport. Transport is the art of that because it is where we link people to what is important to them. And this is how also we impact the way people live in our cities. If you have a bad transport network, no matter what you do, you don't have sustainable cities. And so this is really important. That's why Africa 50, we are really working on transport on the infra side, connecting countries, because we have to unlock trade, so investing into bridge. So we are looking at, for example, the Brazza and the two Congo bridge, which is linking Brazza to Kinshasa. We are doing asset recycling, so we are looking at the Senegambia bridge, linking the south of Senegal to the north through Gambia. So this is it's a bridge on the Gambia River in Gambia. So we are working on that, so to make sure that the investment can be used in the longer term. At the same time, we are working on e-mobility. It's critical. In Africa, for example, if we have something like almost 50% of growth for the population in cities. So if you have that, you cannot bridge the gap by using normal solution, standard solution. That's why the project with the electrical vehicle in Lagos is very important because it takes carbon out of that. So we are looking at e-mobility, and we are looking at also e-mobility for bikes because we have lots and lots of bikes in our cities. So we have to look at the infra that will enable to have those bikes be clean and then not add to our cities pollution. So infra to unlock trade and exchange between countries, trying to have mobility in our cities that will do not have pollution, and also looking at how to enable the movement of people, investing in what we call joint border posts. Because people, when they travel between borders, they tend to stay a long time. People and goods. So here the idea is to see how we can expedite that and make people wait less at the border, make it more fluid. So these are the areas that we touch base. And All this is done in the spirit of enabling flow of people in the cities, between countries, and the flow of goods as well.
So just in a 2 minutes, if Lucille, for instance, is coming to you for investment, what are you looking for? What are some of the readiness, project readiness that you will let you know that, oh, this one certainly will go into financial close? That's 2 minutes.
As I said, as our job and is mainly to conduct project development. So when they come to us, then we'll take a look at the project first, assess the impact. Because we are investing in the project first because of the impact. And then we'll go through all the different elements of which is market, regulatory, technology, the team, because all these are done by people. So the team is really important for us. And at the same time, we want to make sure in the transport sector that the project is sustainable. Sustainable means it uses non or very small level of subsidy. So this is really important for us. And we also see how the project is structured. If you are able to bring in debt, so and the guarantee needed. So basically, it is looking at the project on the eyes on which we would have run the project development. And apart from project development, we can also invest into operation. So we do the kind of developed and follow. We develop the project, or we develop with when the project is at a later stage, we can still invest to bring it to financial close, and then invest into equity as well.
Thank you very much. Sariri, same sector, transport.
Okay, thank you very much. I think it's difficult to follow on when brilliant minds have spoken already, but I think, as you know, transport is one of the few sectors where deal flow is very limited. You find you need to be very innovative, so congrats to the Ondo team who has put such a very interesting project up front. I also think the way they're thinking about the project makes a lot of sense in terms of doing a pilot that demonstrates the effectiveness of the project and viability of the project. So to your question directly, if I was looking at that project out, again, I think they ticked a number of boxes. So one is the commercial viability. What problem is this really solving? How well can you scale this up in terms of replicability and ability to absorb more capital? So I see that in the plan. With respect to the operationality of the project itself, what is in that value chain? What is the most critical element of that value chain? So one of the things I'll critique a bit more is the grid, how you charge those stations using sustainable power. And in a place where there's already very congested and land is not really very available. So we need to think about that. But overall, I think it's a project that has been well sort of thought through. The sponsors have put in their own money. So sponsor quality, sponsors support, I think are all positive. But more importantly, other things that will come to mind are you're dealing with transport. So most transport projects, apart from port projects, are usually paid in local currency. So what do we need to have some sort of conversation around currency exchange. And I think the number that was pulled out, if 80% of the flows go to 4 countries, and those 4 countries already have experienced at least a 15% depreciation in their currencies, then that's a conversation that we need to mitigate for. So there are a number of things out there, but I think specifically on transport projects, again, you have to be very innovative. You have to look for those projects. They're not easy to come by because governments are not releasing transport projects as quickly. The investing framework for transport projects solely will sit in the private sector hands. So they are not really strong regulatory frameworks like you have for renewable energy under most PPP laws for transport. Some of them are still very nascent, and even if when they are there, they've not been tested by a real project. So those are some of the challenges we see on some of the other projects that we're working on. Just to mention a few, that AFC, we also do project development. So I'm in the project development team where we take projects from ideas to bankability and are able to put in money at the early stage. So if I was looking at other projects, at the minimum, the project must serve a purpose, basically answer a question as to what solution or what problem is this project trying to solve. We need to have some nexus on the project. So it's either you're developing it under a private sector framework or a public sector framework, which most transport projects will fall under. And under those situations, you need to find out who is your counterparty. You cannot, we've seen a number of projects where people come up with ideas and say they have a project, but in reality, the local government doesn't even know that this project even exists. So how are you going to get support or funding for that kind of project? So these are the few things that we always look at and to get the projects going. Thank you very much.
Okay, thank you very much. So we come to you, Soji. There are a lot of private sector that are looking for this concessional financing. They get frustrated. One of the reasons being that they don't know a lot of the criteria. How could you really help them, clarify this for them?
Excellent. Thank you very much. First of all, good evening. So basically, from GCF perspective, we have our own investment criteria, right? And it's made up of 6 components. Yeah. The first component is what's the impact potential, number 1. Secondly, the sustainability potential. Thirdly, the paradigm shift. And when I say paradigm shift, the idea ultimately is that we don't want to do deals one by one by one. The idea is to scale new opportunities, right? And to have a pipeline of opportunities that we can invest in. So that's number 3. Fourthly, we are a country ownership. So that means that we work with countries in order to make investments in the countries. And fifth, it's about what we call needs of the recipient. So the need must be there. And lastly, what we call the effectiveness and efficiency. Having said all these, I think the important thing is that all the criteria that I've indicated are not necessarily bankable. They don't necessarily make a project bankable. We are what we call a second level due diligence organization. We work through partners, and we expect those partners, you all know, accredited entities, but we expect those accredited entities to do the due diligence. And what we are looking for is a couple of things. Firstly, what is the problem statement that the project is going to address? And I think similar to what you've just indicated. That's number 1. Secondly, we look at what we call bankability. There's a huge misconception of what bankability means, but ultimately it's about understanding the risk-return profile of a project to meet the investor's criteria and securing financing. Ultimately, that's what it's about. But unfortunately, many people misunderstand what bankability means. They think that you go to a bank and the bank assesses the project and funds it. That is not how things work. The banks will assess a project based on their risk appetite, and if they believe that the project is bankable, then they provide risk appetite in order to move forward with it. Beyond that, banks provide debt. Many people misunderstand debt from equity. Debt is basically, the banks want to ensure that the principal that they put down will be returned, and they are able to meet some return expectation, right? They are not taking equity risk. Equity risk is typically when you're a shareholder and you share in the upside of a project. So from our perspective, the bankability needs to be there. And what do I mean by bankability, just to expand further? I think we expect the feasibility, firstly, for a feasibility study to have been done that looks at financial, it looks at technical, it looks at regulatory, it looks at market. And when I say market, I think there's again, people think that market is this huge market, but we need to separate market need from market demand. Market need, people and want goods and services, but the two questions that need to be asked: what is the willingness to pay and the ability to pay? Right? The willingness might be there, but the ability might be constrained. Right? But the market demand addresses both, where there's a willingness to pay and there's also the ability to pay. So that is a kind of further consideration. So in totality, beyond just the financial, technical, legal, regulatory, in many cases, especially in the markets that we work in more challenging jurisdictions, the regulatory framework not fully developed, and we need clarity, because there are aspects, whether from security perspective, if you're looking at an all-asset debenture, if you're looking at project finance type structure, the security needs to be in place. And as a lender, if you're providing debt, you want to ensure that your risks is fully mitigated. So just to provide a broad context of what we consider to be bankability is absolutely key to what we seek. But our investment criteria, the 6 things I said in terms of impact, paradigm shift, sustainability, country ownership, those are second layers, on top of the bankability. Because from our perspective, as a climate fund, the climate impact is absolutely non-negotiable. So yes, we look at our own investment criteria, but doesn't mean that a project is bankable. So we still look at the underlying bankability of those transactions.
Thank you very much. So we are actually standing between your dinner, and we're going to just take 5 minutes. Anyone with a pressing question for any of the panelists, please let's see your hands, and then just 5 minutes if you want to go for your dinner. Take it fast. Any?
Oh, sir.
Any question for any of the investors?
Question here in the back.
Okay.
My name is Mohammed Badisi. I'm an advisor to governments and a legal scholar in the climate finance space. Just a very simple question. There's been a lot of discussion about pipeline and bankability and sort of the ability to sort of get projects to fit into this mold or these requirements to qualify for a lot of these funds. But a very basic question: what's the point of having a climate fund if the projects have to be both climate compliant and independently bankable? If you have a bankable project, anybody can fund it. So unless you're using the climate capabilities and the climate enhancements to underwrite or enhance the bankability, I don't quite see the purpose of calling it a climate investment. And so that's what I hear from a lot of the governments I work with. Why are we being asked to do the same thing we always did, fit into a project finance model, tick all the boxes of bankability, and engage in climate compliance? What is the actual relationship there that actually benefits the governments and the host markets at the end of the day, other than just higher transaction costs and more overhead?
I think, yeah.
Thanks for that. Ultimately, the funding that we provide is concessional, right? At GCF, we don't look at the financial return. And what I mean by that is we're willing to take a lower return in order to ensure that the project has positive climate impact, right? So we are compensated by the positive aspect of the climate vis-a-vis a much lower return. But it's important, even though we're taking a lower return, that the project is sustainable. The point is, we don't necessarily want to fund a project that, in 5 years, 6 years, or whatever duration of time is not sustainable. It does not, it's not an efficient use of capital. In terms of where we are today, from a macro perspective, we know that the supply of funding is limited, demand is increasing, so we have to be more cautious in terms of how we allocate the limited resources that we have. And thus it's important that the projects that we support, are are sustainable ultimately. So yes, we're a climate fund, and ultimately we look for the climate benefit in compensation for the financial return.
Okay, thank you, Tariq.
Thank you. I think even, we're involved in investing in climate beneficial projects, renewable energy projects, and have been doing so large scale, decentralized, etc. And I think it's a good question because it speaks to this elusive nature of bankability. Indeed, we want projects to be bankable so that they're sustainable. And catalytic capital is not supposed to be permanent. Catalytic capital is supposed to prove out either a sector or de-risk perception that may be disproportionate to the real risk. So catalytic capital is supposed to serve as a step toward the liberation of that project to be able to, those type of projects to operate on their own. But I think the question about whether, if the project is bankable, why does it need the catalytic source? Oftentimes, there is still a wedge that requires the catalytic or the concessional source. And it's the final piece toward bankability. And so if you take an example of the World Bank partial risk guarantee, that was almost like blended finance 1.0, right? The projects needed the bankability elements in respect of an offtake arrangement, technical integrity, but they would not get to financial close without having the final piece of the guarantee behind the termination payment. And it's the same thing in the climate finance space. We still need catalytic capital within, for example, an equity fund, a junior tranche, some kind of first loss, de-risking tools, currency-based tools, construction risk guarantees. There's all sorts of de-risking instruments that are required to be that final piece in the puzzle of bankability that we are then able to prove out and then ultimately scale without that catalytic capital, and then it can go solve another hard problem.
The tipping point for the financial close. Okay, thank you very much. Because of our time, you have just 1 minute. Do you have? No. Okay. I have 1 minute. Do you want to intervene? Okay. Yeah. So that will be the last, and then we come to an end.
Right. No. Well, I think the question is an excellent one because, indeed, I mean, the concessional finance providers, whether it's the GCF, whether it's the CEFA, whether it's other kind of instruments that are there, are obviously there to take a higher risk. And they obviously need to be able to do that. Yet at the same time, there is an interest, as you said, Terje, to ensure that obviously the fundamentals of the project are still sound. We're not sort of providing a resource for ultimately a project that will not sustain over time. So it's really about finding the right balance between sort of that catalytic investment and sort of the overall bankability of the project. And it's not easy to find always, and I don't think we get it always right, because we have to be sometimes also as catalytic finance providers more flexible, whether it's the GCF, and we have good experience with the GCF, but it's also sometimes sort of an environment that is constrained by rules and procedures, obviously, that we have to abide by. But sort of flexibility is really essential, I think, in that equation.
You actually have a dinner for us, and you want us to be at a dinner.
And that actually, what I wanted to say was, I'm highly impressed that so many of you have stayed, and I want to say thank you very much for, being part of GCF's, event, GPIC event this year. It's now what, almost 8 o'clock, and the room is, almost full. So, thank you very much, for your participation and your questions. Thank you.
Yeah, I think that is what I'm going to say. So thank you very much for that. Applause for the investor panel. Okay, thank you too. Thank you.